Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar looking at how we can evolve from Zoom. My name's Neil Stewart. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Neil Stewart Associates. I have been in the events business since the early 1990s. I've been doing hybrid events since 2008. At Neil Stewart Associates, we have videoed and shared all our conferences and events, and we have an archive going back to over 2000. The purpose of today's event is to look at how the discussions about evolving from Zoom, evolving from all kinds of webinars right up to full TV production. We've reached a point where most organizations have spent the last 6 months working their way through adapting to being purely online. A lot of us have been hoping that we would see live events come back in some form this autumn, and the venues have done some fantastic work to try and convert. But the plain fact is that it looks like the virus is going to be with us for a long time, and also that going virtual is here to stay. So a lot of people are now facing the question, how do we evolve from Zoom? How do we use Zoom or WebEx or any of the other platforms that are now emerging? But I will tend to use Zoom the same way as I refer to a Hoover when I really mean a vacuum cleaner. So I posed a series of questions in the invite to this. What are the 5 most common mistakes that people are making in the discussions that I've been watching about how to take conferences into the virtual world or the hybrid world? And I'm going to go through this presentation and I will come back and address each of them. But the first one that seems to me to be obvious is that everyone has been saying, especially for the bigger events, that TV production is the answer. And I think people who work in events and organize events, especially in some of the smaller segments, will know that TV costs have always been way above their budget. The TV production people are trying to adapt, but they really work on a different model. And this horses for courses will be one of the main messages that I want to get over in this presentation. Secondly, a lot of the big presentations I've watched have said that you have to entertain your audience. Now, traditionally, many of us will have held events at big venues, hotels, places that have a wow factor, and I suppose that's a bit of entertainment. But you can take entertaining your audience too far. In some circumstances, it's not actually the primary motive. I think the biggest mistake and the area that most people are getting into trouble is believing that live numbers are everything. Because many people have seen very high registrations for their events, only to discover that huge numbers of people don't turn up on the day. And the way that virtual works, and I'll tell you stories going back to 1999 in the telecoms industry, live numbers are not everything. And if you set that as a benchmark, then you may be setting yourself to fail and not explaining to your colleagues how it works. It's the same audience just online. A lot of organizations, executives will think that in providing events, you can just get the same audience to go online. It's not. And I'll tell you something from our years of experience about different audiences, but also how you find new audiences. And the final thing is that conference producers can't think digital. The idea that people have been running conferences up to now are not able to migrate to this complicated world of TV production and virtual and online delivery. Well, I can tell you that the Narrowcast Media Group was entirely built by conference producers, and it was built by conference producers because the existing TV and video production model didn't work, had the wrong editorial perspective, and was just far too expensive. So we're living in a Zoom universe over the past 6 months. We've all been trying to rethink how to do our meetings. And, you know, Zoom has been fantastic. I'll say this repeatedly. It has saved a great many people. But we've been trying to rethink conferences and exhibitions, seminars and summits, how to do campaigning, how to do training, and how to do annuals. Well, for training, for seminars, and for some meetings and conferences, virtual and online is very good. But for exhibitions and sponsors, it's been much, much more challenging. And a lot of people have reverted to doing free events, and that is not sustainable in the long term. A great many organizations who run good, big, effective events need to have a revenue stream for them. And the way that we've been living for the past 6 months for a great many organizations is not sustainable. And I've been spending a lot of the time with my Neil Stewart Associates hat on, advising other organizations how to set up and address these issues. But we have lived in a Zoom, online, WebEx, Microsoft Teams world, and it has been great, and it's saved a lot of us. But I think everyone's now realizing that it's reached some of its limits. Why do people come to conferences? Everyone's assumed that if you just put something online, that therefore people will come for the content. Content is seen to be king and is king. But the reality is that a lot of people attend conferences and other organizations refer to it as business tourism. And also it provides emotional signifiers. Being sent to a conference on behalf of your organization is often a reward or a recognition or a confirmation of your esteem. And traveling and going to nice venues, and all of us who work in the events industry know that nice venues, things around Westminster, trips to London, were very popular part of the sell. But in the long lockdown and in the new virtual world, a lot of that can't be so easily replicated. And also we know that a lot of people come to events for the networking, and that is quite difficult to replicate. So audiences are being disrupted. So we're facing a lot of dilemmas and solutions. Getting online is not enough. How do you make the new economics work? What are the different kinds of video and digital? How do you evolve from Zoom? And how do you make video particularly for professional audiences, which is the niche that people like myself and others have worked in? And I want to introduce you to, if you're not clear about it, the importance of audience segmentation, because you need to know which part of the business you're in and what audience you're trying to reach and what they expect. Because the conference and events industry, even the conferences events that individual associations run, are very diverse, and we'll come to that later. So segmentation is the key. You need to know what to do for the appropriate one. So if you're running a big consumer show like the boat show or one of the big homes show, then that is a completely different experience from if you're doing an association conference or a business-to-business conference or even a trade show. There are lots of other kinds of events. It could be a product launch. A huge number of events are internal events. They're for customers and sales and identifiable groups. And the key things about consumer shows, product launches, customer relations, staff and sales conferences, and quite a lot of trade shows is that there is either no entry fee or a very low entry fee for the participants. So if you go to the boat show and things, you can get in for £12 because these are being funded by the sponsors and the exhibitors. And if we're going to rebuild conferences and events, then we need solutions not just for the delegates, but also for some of the people who have been providing the funding, the exhibitors and the sponsors. And they are important because they often bring large parts of the audience to our events. But with B2B conferences, association conferences, and training of various kinds, there's a much more emphasis on the revenue from the paying audience, the delegate fee. And we need to revise what it is that people get from that. So Zoom has been transformational. There's no doubt about it. Microsoft Teams, WebEx, lots of them have been created for internal work, and they've tried to migrate. But I think most people would agree that you find that, and we may find it today, that once you get beyond 15 or 20 participants, you begin to reach the limits of what you can easily do and what kind of quality you can provide on these platforms. And if you watch any of the television news or listen to the Today program, you just constantly hear the links failing or things buffering, because there is lots of incompatibility between the technology that's used in television and the technology that's used on these kinds of platforms. People have been fighting to bring discipline to the use of Zoom. And of course, there are large numbers of organizations that are not allowed to use Zoom, that won't use some of the other platforms because of security issues. We do some big events on maternity and midwifery. In America, midwives, by and large, are not able to watch through Zoom because midwives in the health service in America are usually part of the Navy. Weird things in America. It's a federal government system, and the federal government won't use Zoom. The other big problem about Zoom is the illusion of no cost and of free options, and just how that can be transferred, because I think everybody knows that although it can be sent out apparently for free, there's a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And all of us have had very mixed experiences on the effectiveness of Zoom, Microsoft Teams. And a lot of it's about the quality and discipline. And the quality issues are some of the key issues that will bring back sponsors and exhibitors and the partners. But Zoom and the Zoom experience, the online experience, has been transformational. And I think those people that are hoping that this is just temporary and that you can't, that you can go back, I think most people recognize that that's not going to be possible. Now, the first of the big shout-outs that seem to be happening everywhere is that TV production is the answer. Now, when I say TV production, I also include a lot of the video companies that come out of the television industry. And lots of you will have had approaches from these companies, and a lot of them are fantastic. And we are looking at ways to work with them at the appropriate level. But you'll often have been proposed costs which just seem way above any budget that you can have, because TV production is really built for specific kinds of advertising and communications. I usually tell people that the TV model is built on £40,000 per hour, which is why if any of you over the past 25 years have managed to get a 10-minute video or a 15-minute video made by a video company who come round and they film your conference and they put it all together, you'll quite often end up spending £10,000 for a 15-minute video. That's why it's 40,000 an hour. I was looking at one video company the other day who have been trying to reach into the events business and some of the areas that you will work in, and they were making a special offer, $3,000 to make a 1-minute video, because their business was advertising. It wasn't the communications and conference business. The other thing about TV is that most TV is pre-record. Now, pre-record has become a greater part of what people have been doing over the past 6 months. Having tried to run whole live events, folk have discovered how exhausting that is. And sometimes they've wondered how television does it. Well, television doesn't do it. If you look at any television schedule and just add up how much is pre-recorded, you'll find that the only bits that are live are some of the breakfast shows, Loose Women at Lunchtime, and the news. And even those programs, they absolutely stick to formulas where people are seated at sofas and they don't move around. And the new BBC studio even has robot cameras, which you're able to see. It's very fixed, it's very limited. And when you see them try and replicate it in conferences and venues, they struggle and it's very expensive. So when I refer to TV production, I'm talking about a mentality, an outlook, a way of thinking about video that's not often appropriate for conferences and association business. Also, one of the reasons that TV is so costly is TV cleans up its performance in edit costs afterwards, which is why the turnaround and the wait is often so long. So although I sound very critical of TV production, and I feel critical because they've been pitching very high costs to lots of our clients in ways that have been ridiculous, but obviously they're desperate. I think it's important to bear these things in mind because they are appropriate for some areas, but not for others. So a bit of a reality check. So I think the question everyone's asking is not abandon Zoom. I mean, these are going to be the bulk of the type of meetings that many of us are doing for a long time and for internal and others. So which virtual platforms work best for which audiences? What are the delegate and viewer needs? Are you working for an employer? What are the commissioners' needs? What do they want to get out of it? Is it an association and membership motivations? We just completed a big AGM for an organization yesterday, which involved voting and nominations and formal business, the kind of stuff that normal TV producers would want to cut out. And lots of people are having to do those official transactions. And there are particular things that you need to do on that, some of them to meet legal obligations. I've had to warn a number of organizations to check that their statutes and their rules allow them to do things virtually. Otherwise, they could have their decisions overturned. But also it's transforming existing audiences and events. It's able to reach excluded audiences and reach new audiences and publishing. Because like this event, there'll be a recording afterwards. So the phenomenon of the event being over when you get to that point at 4:30 and somebody breaks out a bottle of Chardonnay and everyone relaxes. In the virtual world, that's not the case. And the biggest problems that people are having is helping work out solutions for paying funders, sponsors, and exhibitors. Now, the other thing that people talk about is that you've got to entertain the audience. Well, certainly you want to make impact, but I've listened to a lot of people arguing that every event has to be turned into something that's gripping and will hold you to a television screen. You'll hear people saying, how do you keep them hooked? And you're almost reaching the techniques that would be used by Ant and Dec. So how do you measure how much entertainment you need to put in? I mean, I looked at one event yesterday and it looks like it might be appropriate for them, but they had about 5 celebrities and an astronaut. Now, most people are not going to be doing that. But if you're doing a consumer show or a mass show or something that's going out, for instance, to all the students in a sector, then I would give it 5 stars for using some TV type techniques. And if it's big enough and it's got a big enough budget, then it is appropriate to use some of those techniques and to produce material that can be seen afterwards in that way. A lot of these organizations and video and things are used to working in product launches. And there they do get very, very big budgets because the product launches are seeing their budget in millions. A lot of organizations, when they put on in-house events for their customer relations, and remember that can also mean member relations, they want to make impact. And we quite often at big events will have a celebrity or somebody else who gives a talk that's outside of the circle, and we'll film that because we know that that will draw people in and it'll be used afterwards. You get staff sales conferences, Again, when people are selling, you want high production values. And also at trade shows, but a lot of trade shows, it's face-to-face. How do you create that? But in business-to-business conferences, association conferences and training, I think you're often working at the kind of one-star level. You want good, decent quality. You want good video and things that come out of it, but you're not trying to compete with the top end of the advertising and television industry. And you might do some of that once a year, but even that is proving too expensive for many people. So after lockdown, my general view is that virtual is here to stay. And it's here to stay for a number of other reasons, which will become apparent, because virtual and hybrid events were already taking off. As I said, we've been doing them for 12 years in our specialist niches. But I think we're going to see a long period when employers are very risk averse to staff traveling, even after the lockdowns have ended. But even before the virus, there was a huge wave of demand for reduction in carbon footprints. And one of the first targets, and anyone watching this from universities or higher education will know that curbing the international travel attendance at conferences is one of the biggest things that academics have been discussing. And even before the lockdown, big international events that would normally have been held in London or Barcelona and others are talking about having one event in London and people watching and participating in other time zones. We're definitely going into an era of austerity and frugality. So some of your audience in future will be able still to come to events and will be able to afford to pay fees, but a lot won't. And there'll be a much more graded way of paying and viewing for things. Also, equality of access. It's always been the case that particularly women with caring responsibilities had limited access to conferences where you had to travel and take several days. We've traditionally run hub events in places like Manchester and Leeds and Birmingham for a number of our events. And the audiences that attend there, even at the senior level, are overwhelmingly women because they can attend in their normal office hours and be back for childcare or for family caring reasons. And it's quite striking how much this gives access to new audiences. The other thing is time-poor executives. Most people working in these events will know that you have a regular number of people who, when they have paid, do not turn up. And that's because they're time poor. One of the ways that Neil Stewart Associates managed to build and afford to build its video capacity in the Narrowcast Media Group was that once we went virtual and hybrid, we could say to everybody, you will get a full copy of all the presentations. And as a result, we have not had to pay a fee back to people, a cancellation, for almost a decade. And that has been used to fund our step into virtual. It seems very obvious, but there's always been a reluctance in many conference and events organizers to tackling this. The next thing that I think has been the most challenging is the sense that live numbers are everything. People want to duplicate the numbers that they can get on a normal event. And many people have had the excitement of getting much more people signing up to their event, and then the terrifying experience of anything up to half of them not attending. Now, this has a history. For many of us in the events business, we've known that even when you were had a paying audience, you would often get in between 5 and 10% who just didn't show up because they were at another meeting or a client or some other demand. For free events, free live events, even before virtual, you could see 30% of people not turning up. Now, online, some of the biggest organizers are seeing 50% plus not appearing at the live. And one of the biggest live events was held about 2 weeks ago by one of the biggest event providers They said that they had over 35,000 people registered to attend an event, which had previously had 4,000 people attending as normal. And they were very excited about that. On the day, only 15,000 actually joined live. Now that was fantastic because it was up from 4,000. The only problem is that the 4,000 used to pay and the 15,000 were entirely free. And the next stage is going to be very challenging for them. So there are big lessons in time-poor executives. And this is a lesson I first learned in 1999. I was working in the telecom sector. We were part of Informa, and they had these huge telecoms conferences, the one segment of the market that was connected in those days and had video and other presentation facilities on their desks. And like some of you who have probably been around as long as me, we were making CDs and sending them out to everybody, and we were trying early stages of live streaming. And months later, we couldn't find a single person who'd watched the whole show, because we learned the lesson that executives are time poor. If they don't turn up, then you have to be able to cut the material up into smaller packages so they can pick and choose what they watch when they have the time to watch it. And that is a process that goes on for weeks after your event. So with live events, screen time for competition is fierce, and you'll all know it. Already this morning, we've had apologies from a couple of people who, because they're in the office or because of other demands. So my argument is that live numbers are important, but on-demand and catch-up is the new normal. That's where you will be able to add value and work closely with sponsors and exhibitors. And these are the techniques that you're going to need. And so an overemphasis on live numbers is simply likely to lead to disappointment. So on-demand and catch-up is the new work, not just the new normal, it's new work. And people are going to have to learn how to do new agenda and program design with one eye on the box set afterwards. New ways of content curating. A lot of you are doing this already. You know that you've got to leave bigger gaps in the day, do shorter events. You've got to keep an eye on the box set. You may not put all the material that happens live on the day into a box set afterwards. And I use box set simply as a way of explaining how material can be put together afterwards. You can plan for the online release. We did a 3-day event, and this week a global event on maternity and midwifery, and the online release is going to be next Wednesday, and that'll be a selection of the box set, some of it for international, some of it domestic. You can target new audiences, people who would never attend your event. And again, just to use my maternity midwifery example, a lot of the people we work with, the exhibitors, are very keen to get to consultants and other people who wouldn't normally attend. Video allows you to do that. If you have consultants speaking, other consultants will watch. Some will watch live, but most will watch online. So you could get the opportunity to target new audiences, to think about people who you're not reaching at the moment. And a lot of people publish their material and then hope that it will go around the world by itself. And YouTube and others love to tell stories of videos that have 1 million views, etc. Well, that's fine if you can get it, but most of those are very short and much more in the social media area. Trying to go viral in the professional world of conferences and events is really about push marketing, pushing it out afterwards. The good thing about video and virtual is when you have the material in video form, you can also ask your speakers, your exhibitors, all the people you've worked with to push it out as well to their databases as you do to yours. And that is really how things take off and get recognition. For people that are doing conferences and events, it also means that you've got to learn new skills and new social media. Paul, who's hosting this event today, started off in conference and event marketing, which he still does. And he's had to learn all the kind of new skills, not just how to host programs, but how to think about marketing them afterwards, how you use social media as well as your traditional databases. So new business cycles and new budgets. And the crudest way that I put it is when I'm working with people on an event, I tell them that when the live event is finished, they're only halfway through the digital job. The new world is much more extended. And conference and event organizers are in quite a good position to do that. And it's one of the reasons, interestingly, that newspapers have always struggled to do effective conference programs. Conference and events organizers are used to looking 6 months, a year ahead and trying to predict what will be the hot topics. And that is quite a skill. If you ask the editorial newsroom of a newspaper to do that, or you ask academics who are used to working, with years to make their mind up, they go into a sort of nervous breakdown. And I can tell you, I have seen both universities and newspapers trying to set up effective conference streams, and the journalists and the academics simply don't have the discipline of people who put events programs together. And it's a very underestimated skill. Well, that skill now needs to be extended to who are the audiences that can watch it in the 6 months afterwards. So there's lots of budget dilemmas, and I'll just run through these on the virtual options. Some organizations will know that a lot of the venues are now setting themselves up as studios, and people like Etc. Venues have really led the way on this. Places like the QE2 have always been able to do it. A remarkable number of universities have big lecture theatres that are de facto television studios if they knew how to use them. And they have technical capacity, but there are cost and affordability issues. And the key thing about them is you mustn't mistake the ability to live stream as being the same as publishing or editorial support or marketing capacity. So a lot of people that sign up with specialist venues and studios sometimes think that that's going to just generate an audience in its own right. It's not. It's not the same as publishing, and editorially you still have to do all the work. There will be some organizations that are asking, well, can we build in-house capacity? And there will be appropriate for many organizations. And I've advised over the years organizations, first of all, how to build their in-house conference capacity for running commercial conferences. And I've been advising people on how it's appropriate to build their video capacity. If you've got enough events, you're doing enough over the year, that is an option, but it means you do need to get in people with the right level of skills and just make that judgment. And the third option is the contractor. You'll hear the term, the studio in the box, where we can create a studio of almost anywhere. To show how long we've been doing it, we launched a train from St Pancras Station when it was still a wreck. There was no electricity, there was no water. We didn't just bring in a studio in a box, we had to create everything. But it's mobile and it can go anywhere. And that's one of the great advantages of where we have now reached with the universal availability of broadband, Wi-Fi, and actually some of the top-end dongles are virtually broadcasting quality now. So I think one of the ways that people have been justifying going online at the moment is because they don't have the actual costs of live events. There is often quite a lot of budget money around. One of the things I often try and get people to remember about the cost of events is it's not just the venue and the catering and all the costs that are particular to it, but it's all the cost of the people attending and traveling. And I did a calculation for the overall cost of an event for 200 people in the health service from around the world. And they were very surprised when it came to almost £350,000, and also surprised at how much their carbon footprint was and how little of their target audience they were actually reaching. Now, senior managements in public services, for instance, are now going to have to make these calculations. So there's going to be new stringencies on all kinds of events and things. The other thing that people say is it's the same audience just online. Well, one of the things I often have to show to people is that your old audience often changed quite dramatically. So a conference that had 500 people last year and 500 people this year, when you really drill down, you'll often find that 40% of the organizations were new, 60% of the delegates were new, even if they were coming from older organizations, and 20% of your sponsorship and exhibition was new. That's a very high churn rate. So events organizers have actually always been used to living with that level of change. But nowadays, our audiences are likely to be time poor, budget poor, clashing commitments, family commitments, and social policy, a lot of the ones that I mentioned earlier. But virtual and hybrid gives you the opportunity to reach new audiences, to reach out much wider, and to provide new access. But when hybrid comes back, costs will come back with it as well. And I think a lot of people have realized that running a live event and having the online on top is going to be a new challenge. We do a lot of events where this is the kind of narrow casting profile. You might get 1,000 people sign up for it, 500 make it live on the day. Another 500 might be watching it live or get the box set. But then within a week, you'll have another 1,500 people watching. And that's actually what happened on one event in Dublin earlier this year. So those were fantastic numbers. One of the key things to look at in the numbers on videos is how long are people watching? And the narrowcast media have figures where people are watching lots of presentations for an average now of almost an hour. And if you know anything about YouTube, you'll know that the average length of watching on that is anything between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. If somebody is watching your videos for half an hour or an hour, especially in the specialist areas of some of the people that are watching, then you know you've absolutely got right through to the right audience and that it's their day job, because this is not entertainment and people wouldn't watch it unless it was their day job. So it's a fantastic pre-qualifier for being sure that you're reaching the right audience. Virtual is never free, and I think most people are beginning to realize that you still have to do all the creative costs, all the research, all the staff time, all the data management, all the marketing, all the people need to take time out, and you have to pay for the web hosting. So you may save on the venue and the catering, but there's still a huge amount of costs involved. And those are going to be made more explicit, I think, in people's calculations in the future. But the key point is, can you make impact? Does it have authority, what you're doing? Does it feel authentic? And can you create a legacy? So the final thing was conference producers can't think digital. Certainly a lot of conference managers and senior executives have been stuck in the old football manager's dilemma. So when Rupert Murdoch said that he wanted to live stream football, the whole of the Football Association went into a panic because they thought that if you live stream it, people won't come to the event. Sponsors won't pay. Blogs' garages, won't put billboards around the side, and Maggie's Pies won't be able to sell enough on the day. Well, that's just not how digital and online works. It creates new audiences, and those new audiences create new revenue streams. So conference producers can think digital because they can cope with the complexity of a live event. I've had lots of television producers say to me when they come to our big conferences that they just, including news producers, that when they look at it and how many speakers we have, how it just runs live for the whole day, that if they tried to do that in a television studio, they'd have a nervous breakdown. Also, conference producers already know a huge amount about the key components of data and marketing in the transformations that have gone on since the turn of the century. And data and marketing is the key to making a lot of the narrowcasting of conferences work. I've talked about the newspaper dilemma, why so many of them have got stuck, because they can't work on these long timelines. Conference producers can't. TV is not geared to be live. They love pre-recording, and I've noticed a lot of self-serving speeches that have said, well, we can pre-record everything, because that's not how these things work. And most TV producers do 30 minutes, 1 hour per day. So the event doesn't stop at the breakdown. At the end of the day, you're only halfway through, and conference producers can know how to do that. It's still the same with communications and marketing and publishing dilemmas. So choose your audience, choose your platforms, choose your channels. Know what your message is to which audience, what kind of impact you want to make, what's the legacy publishing you want to come out of it, and what are the new audiences you want to reach. Value what you've created, because existing conferences are fantastically content rich. Some of you will be doing events which, if in a day with speakers, that if you gave them to a university, the university would run a program of lectures for a whole term. So that the density of content that conferences and events create, especially in specialist areas, is very powerful. We've got to make new economic models work and prepare for a hybrid future. And a lot of us have been doing that, but it is still evolving. I don't pretend to have all the answers. So this is how you evolve from Zoom. You will be retrofitting a lot of existing conferences and events, spreading them out over days, bigger gaps, dropping some of the features. But we're now in the stage where we have to plan for future events and for post-event publishing and online engagement. And the key thing is, if you've got the content, which most of you do, and you know how to create that content, then you are in the strongest position. I'm sorry about this rather grainy picture here, but just to show you the scale of it, these yellow blocks are the traditional conference creation of content production, getting your speakers, sales and sponsorship, marketing it, and then staging it and sometimes streaming it. If you do publishing, you have to go all the way through into the edit, to publish, to distribute, and to do sales. And you need to have lots of other functions, new audiences, external audiences. And it's all about statistics, 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 statistics. That's the new world you need to live in, because that is also what the sponsors and exhibitors want. So when you're doing strategic reviews, producing for virtual solutions, these are the things I think you need to think about: audience segmentation, selection, new audiences, new production and distribution cycles, the importance of data, creating on demand, having good box selections, finding out the new pricing, and choosing the presentation channels to match. I know it seems like a tremendous mouthful, but most people that work in events are already doing large parts of this kind of complex work. So a lot of video companies look the same on the surface, but if you're going to really build an effective solution in the future, you're going to need all these kind of functions underneath: live and online, targeted delivery, research, and mass marketing, as well as the camera crews at the front. And I think that is enough from me for now. And I'd be very happy to take anybody's questions.